Jesus tells a parable about a son who ponders his father's love only after he has spurned it. The grace he receives is beyond his hopes. That same grace is a crisis for an older brother who believed it was his obedience that earned his place in the Father's home. The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 15th chapter. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. And a few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. And he would have gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him?' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. Sisters and brothers in faith, grace to you and peace from God our Father and from our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Walter Brueggemann, one of my teachers, wrote that there are 3 people we need to evangelize. 3 people, just 3, who need to hear the good news. The 3 people are the outsider, the insider, and the next generation. And evangelism, of course, is not really about growing the church. Evangelism is about sharing the good news. And usually, if you do that effectively, the church will grow, but usually, not always. So who are these 3 people? Well, the outsider, that's pretty easy. People who are on the outside of the faith obviously need to hear the good news. It's news that's going to change their lives. It's news that changes everything. But why do we have to tell the good news to the insider? Don't they already know? Well, yes and no. People in the church have heard and have responded, but this good news that we've got, it's kind of a slippery thing. It's so easy to tame it or to make it into something it's not, and ultimately to no longer know it. And the third group, the next generation, is just like the outsider. Nobody is born a believer. Somebody somewhere has to tell them. And growing up on the inside, it's easy to assume that our habits and our errors are the good news itself. And today's gospel tries to share the good news with all three groups: father to the next generation, insider to outsider, and insider to insider. It's all there. And if we in the church knew nothing but this story, we could faithfully tell and retell and relearn the good news all of our lives. I'm an insider, so I'll begin by retelling the story as an insider who periodically needs to rehear the good news. And if you ask me, the prodigal son's brother has a legitimate beef, doesn't he? He's the only sensible member of this whole dysfunctional family. His little brother asks for his inheritance before his father dies. Basically, he says to his dad, "I hate this family, I hate this farm, I hate this town, I wish you were dead." And if my son were to say that to me, I'm pretty sure he would not get his inheritance. Certainly not now, maybe not ever. And I'd probably kick him out of the house, let him learn how the real world works for a while, and instead this nutty father gives it to him. Risks his retirement, risks the older brother's inheritance, risks everything on that self-centered son. Well, everybody knows what's going to happen. He'll waste it all, then come crawling back, maybe make a nice speech about how he's changed, and Dad should tell him, "You made your bed, now it's time to sleep in it." And instead, before he even gets to town, he goes running out to meet him. I mean, what a humiliating display. Because wealthy people, they don't run. I mean, would President Trump run out to meet Hillary Clinton? Or vice versa, even if they had repented? This father runs out to meet his good-for-nothing son, dresses him up in fine clothes, gives him a ring that says he is a member of the family, and basically wraps him in a flag right in front of the whole town of loyal, hardworking laborers. I mean, what kind of an example is that? And after this no-strings-attached bailout, what's to stop him from doing exactly the same thing again? It's like this lousy brother is too big to fail. So the older son, the good son, he decides to make a public statement. He refuses to go into the party and pretend nothing has happened here. He sticks to his principles, and he does it publicly so that everybody can see the outrage, and maybe he can change his dad. I can see it. The older son, the insider, has a legitimate beef. And I get it. And what does the father say? "But son, we have to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and has been found." Give me a break. As an insider, I hear this story and I find myself siding with the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious leaders. That's been their complaint about Jesus all along. Jesus is hanging around with tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners. He's eating and drinking and throwing parties with all the wrong people, and he's doing work on the Sabbath and teaching them to break the laws of Moses. I mean, if you start doing that, Jesus, it's a slippery slope. Where's it going to end? If you reward people who have broken the rules, what does that do to the ones who followed the rules? That's how an insider like me hears the story. I wonder how the father sees it. I'm a father. I also have 2 sons, and I love them both. But they are very different people. Ever notice that about your kids? You raise them the same way, but they're just complete opposites. I get to meet with young parents before their children are baptized, and they love their kids too, it turns out. I don't know if you knew that. In fact, at every class I ask them, is there anything this child can do in the next 21 years that would make you stop loving him or her? And so far, none of the parents have said yes. And so I press them a little bit. I say, well, what if they get bad grades? Will you stop loving them then? Nope. How about if they run away? Nope. How about if they become a terrorist? Well, they sometimes say, I'll be disappointed, or I'll do everything I can to stop that, but yes, no matter what they do, I will still love him or her. Is that how this father felt, too? He had 2 sons, 2 very different people. And it appears from the story that he has lost both of them. One to a foreign country, the other to, what would you call it? Loveless duty? And the younger's lostness was relatively easy. He wants his inheritance while he's still young enough to enjoy it, get out of this town, go live large in Vegas. And the father who loves him gives him his freedom and his riches, and predictably his idea of freedom became another kind of slavery. And his idea of a good life led to poverty. And even he could see how stupid he was and how good he had it at home. And seeing that, once he saw that, he could come back. The older brother never left, at least not physically. Emotionally, he was in a far country just as much as his wild brother. You can hear his thanklessness, his loveless duty in his bitter speech when his dad runs again to invite him to the party. I've slaved for you all these years, and you never even gave me a baby goat so I could party with my friends. But when this son of yours came, you killed the fatted calf. Welcome home, brother. And it turns out the older brother, the insider, he has deep, dark issues too. If he was your son, how would you reach him? He always does his duty. He never asks for anything. He never really enjoys anything. He never disobeys. And he probably thought of himself as a model son, especially compared to that good-for-nothing brother. And the father loves both of his sons, different as they are. And he'll do anything for both of them. And he will always call them his sons, even though each boy in his own way tries to get out of the family. Do you see how this story, the good news, is not really about morality? It's not about doing right and wrong, as important as those things might be. This is a story about a father's love. And his love is foolish. His love is extravagant. And maybe it's even a little ridiculous. But can you imagine your joy the moment you see your child whom you thought was dead? Can you imagine that moment? The one you missed and grieved over every single day. Such is our Lord's joy over any lost one who is found. And the older son, he can't stand it. It's just not fair. And he knows a lot about morality. He knows a lot about right and wrong. He does not know much about love. He doesn't understand. He never understands how much he is loved. Everything his father has provided, he takes for granted in sheer thanklessness. And he never learns to love his father or his brother. And by the end of the story, it is clear that of the two, he, the good son, the insider, he is the one who is more lost. Back to evangelism. We, the insiders, I'm going to call all of you insiders because anyone who attends church these days is probably an insider. We have good news to share. But first, we must hear it again. All of us in our own way have been lost. All of us have been prodigals, demanding and squandering the gifts our Father gives us, and then turning home in remorse. And at times, all of us are incredibly self-righteous like that older son. Moral, but no less lost than our misbehaving brothers and sisters, whom we may find just cause to hate. All of us, in our own way, have turned away from our Father and our brother. And the good news is, our Lord loves you just like you love your child. And he gives and gives and gives to all of his lost children. There's nothing he will not give. We end these 40 days of Lent with our Lord stark naked and dead, hanging on a cross, empty, nothing left to give. Nailed up there, ironically, and this haunts me all the time, nailed up there by the good sons, by the insiders, who demand that their rules be followed. And even then, it has nothing to do with right and wrong. It has to do with a Lord and Father who is yearning for them, for you. A Father who will do anything, give anything, even endure his own murder to bring you back into the family, into the household. So wherever you are, whether living large in a far-off country or close by doing your duty, your Father is running out to meet you. And he finally finds you and throws his arms around you. And he puts the family ring on your finger and he dresses you in the finest clothes. And the only thing left to do is to turn toward home, lift up your glass, and join the party.